Advanced Heroquest, Tobaro's Shame, the Guardian in the Deep. The heroes had bravely fought their way through the sewers of Tobaro, slaying both the Skaven and the Scions of Nurgle in order to reach the secret underground gate to the Palazzo del Vonto, the fortified manse of the arch-traitor Marco Broglio. The party had searched for and finally found all 9 of the shards to the last remaining amulet that would unlock the magical gate. So, finally, all that remained to be done was for it to be reassembled and placed into the locking mechanism. Each shard was handed over to the wizard, Magnus the Bright, and he employed his magics and a sprinkling of fire dust to imbue the shards with burning heat and reforge them into a single object once more. The searing heat of the process made all the party members, besides the 2 dwarfs who were unperturbed by such furnace-like temperatures, to take a step back until the wizard had finished. Magnus then reabsorbed the heat into himself, and the amulet was cold to touch in an instant. He handed it over to Sven, who placed it in the lock. However, nothing happened. The party looked at each other before all eyes fell upon the wizard. In the momentary silence, the sound of many Skaven voices coming from the sewers behind them could be heard. Heinrich sheathed his sword with a sigh. This was not supposed to happen, yeah? The wizard stroked his beard with a thoughtful look on his face. Well, wizard, what now? Sven asked impatiently. And with that, the mage pulled out one of the scrolls that dangled from his belt, unfurled it, and began to read. I beseech the spirit of the entrance, awake, and come forth from your slumber. We travelers seek ingress into the hidden place. Homage to thee, O guardian of our city's defenders. With this, Magnus pricked his finger with his athame and placed a drop of blood on the amulet. Red tendrils burst forth from it and snaked out across the large golden gate, drawing back bolts and twisting archaic mechanisms before heaving the doors open with a loud crack. Magnus moved to the fore and illuminated the long room in front of them with a magical flame. Cobwebs covered the ceiling space, and the floor was littered with old, brittle animal bones. Magnus looked back towards Sven Hammerhelm, a questioning look on his face. Aye, well, this seems to match the descriptions I've read of this place. According to those, this leads directly to a cavern within which the guardian of the palazzo apparently slumbers. I've no idea what it is, but my sources seem to indicate that it's some kind of imperishable creature that was bound to a nearby magical throne. Of course, this entrance is long forgotten, so I expect the chamber will be empty, so nothing to concern ourselves with. Behind its throne is a door that will take us to the cellar, and from there we can begin our ascent up the tower. We're on the last leg now, boys. Suddenly, from behind, the party heard the scurrying of Skaven feet upon flagstones. We must hurry, comrades, Heinrich said as he unsheathed his blade once more. The party moved as one to cross the threshold, and Magnus pulled out the amulet to close the secret gate behind them, just as the room flooded with Skaven bodies. The party still consisted of the 6 adventurers who had set out into the sewers below the city of Tobaro and fought their way through the dungeon surrounding the secret gate. Leading the party, as ever, was the dwarf who bore a well-hidden grudge, Sven Hammerhelm. Beside him stood the eloquent mercenary knight from Nordland, Heinrich Lewin. Alongside these consummate fighters, the shadowy dark elf and former assassin, Tilean Darkstar, carried his trusty bow in one hand and his malicious sword in the other, dried poison still staining the edge of its blade. Behind, the wizard, Magnus the Bright, patted the pouch that contained his precious spell components, whilst his other hand rested on the hilt of the fame secreted beneath his robes. Supporting the 4 heroes were the 2 newest members of the party, the gifted swordsman with a dark secret, Wendell, and the deadly dwarf slayer, Aldar El-Gongi, both of whom already had long tallies of dead to their names. Upon opening and then quickly closing the secret gate behind them, the party found themselves in a long room lit by burning torches. Clearly, this area was not as abandoned as they first thought. On the far wall was a small door, and to the left of it stood a bronze statue of one of the gods of Tobaro. Near this, on the left-hand wall, was an old weapons rack, and across from this, on the right-hand wall, was a large double door. As usual, Heinrich and Sven moved to the fore, joined by Aldar and Wendell. Behind these 4, the wizard, Magnus, and the elf Tilean stood ready, the sound of skaven claws scratching at the outside of the secret gate behind them. Sven shrugged and moved to go and investigate the weapons rack. Something was glinting there. Upon reaching it, he found a single spear. It was weighted strangely, so he took his hammer and snapped the haft of the spear in half to better balance it. This way it would make a good missile weapon if the need arose. Heinrich moved next and went straight to the small door opposite. It was locked, although there was neither a lock nor any obvious way of opening it. Pressing his ear to the wood of the door, he could hear the sound of running water and a fainter sound, something that resembled the cackling of some crazed city drunk. He turned to the others.
It won't open, but I'm not sure I want to open it.
Tilean nodded and moved to the large double doors and tried the latch. The door was unlocked. The swordsman Wendell then also quickly went to join the elf at the door. The dwarf slayer Aldar El-Gongi surveyed the bloody bruises on his torso caused by the champion of Nurgle's mace and frowned. It's true that he was a doom seeker, but he did not wish to meet his death hobbled nor weak. And so, with more than a quanta of reticence, he grabbed a single healing potion that dangled from his waist and gulped down its contents. Thus fortified, he went to join Tilean and Wendell and seek his end with vigour and honour at the hands of their foes beyond the double doors. The last to act was Magnus. He had noticed that something was amiss with the statue in the far corner and went to investigate. His intuitions were once again correct, and upon reaching the bronze statue, he saw that its upstretched arm was in fact a lever. Without a moment's hesitation, he drew the lever down and span around to see what would happen. The door that Tilean and Wendell had opened led into a large cavern lit by bioluminescent flora that coated the roof of stalactites above their heads. The cavern led up to a small portcullis on the far wall and 2 large double doors on both side walls. 2 large trapdoors lay on the rock floor. Both were chained shut. The whirring of gears resounded around the large room as Magnus pulled the lever on the statue in the room adjacent to the cavern with a stiff jerk. The double doors on the left-hand wall opened with a creak to reveal a small room containing a large table, another statue, and a half-starved young ogre. The leader, Sven Hammerhelm, and the GM rolled off to see who won the surprise roll, and it was the heroes who came out on top. Vendel moved first to come into line of sight of the ogre, and he hoped to draw him out. He had every confidence that his swordsmanship would keep him safe, and, to be honest, this was not unwarranted. Tilean had a slightly different idea and moved to take a shot at the ogre, employing our house rule that allows elves to both move and shoot with a bow. As could be expected, the arrow struck its target with unerring accuracy, but the ogre's high toughness, an 8 no less, meant the more difficult task was wounding the creature, and also, as could be expected, it caused only a single wound. The next to move was Aldar El Gongi the Slayer, but his shorter legs meant that he ended up still far away from the action. Next up was Sven. Seeing Aldar's slow progress, he remembered the run rule, and rolling a die got a 2, meaning he was able to move an extra 2 squares in addition to the 5 his speeder characteristic allowed, bringing him abreast with the Slayer. Heinrich likewise followed suit, and rolling a die gained an extra 8 squares to his movement, which he used to make himself the closest target to the ogre. Finally then came Magnus, who simply moved to the rear of the party in the hope he could lend his aid to them when combat was joined. In response, the starving ogre grunted and staggered forwards, but unfortunately couldn't reach any of the party. Vendel charged forwards, his sword raised high, his stance nonchalant yet poised, and, dodging its halberd blocks, struck the mistreated ogre squarely across the chest, inflicting 3 more points of damage. Heinrich then moved to join in the fight and plunged his blade deep into the flank of the wounded ogre, inflicting 4 more damage and almost killing it, but not quite. That delight went to Tilean. The elf leaned in with an arrow already nocked and, in full confidence, sent it hurtling between his 2 comrades in arms as they fought and into the heart of the bleeding ogre, inflicting 2 wounds and killing it in an instant. A blessed release from its tortured existence, no doubt. And, with the death of the ogre, it returned to the exploration phase. The Slayer, Aldar, kicked things off by moving to the large double doors across from the dead ogre's room, but he found them to be locked. However, as he placed his ear to the door, he could hear heavy footsteps, the clank of armor, and weapons being readied. The swordsman Vendel flicked the ogre's blood from his blade and went to join the Doomseeker by the door, eager to find enemies that might pose a real challenge. Tilean spun on the spot and moved to come up behind Vendel and Aldar, his hand hovering near his quiver out of pure habit. Magnus used this lull in the action to perform a quick search of the lower half of the main cavern and found a total of 25 gold crowns strewn about it. Heinrich moved to the nearby table and searched it, but found nothing except empty dishes and flagons that had been drained dry. The starving ogre had already picked everything clean during his forced incarceration in the room. Finally, Sven Hammerhelm moved into the ogre's room and immediately spotted another statue of the same ilk as the one they'd seen in the first room, and ran over to it. At the end of each exploration phase, the GM rolls a d12. If a 12 or a 1 comes up, then the GM gets a dungeon counter. At this point, he got a 12 and received an escape counter. In the next turn, Tilean searched the remaining half of the cavern, but unfortunately found nothing. Heinrich's search of the ogre's room too, alas, bore no fruit. Magnus then moved to join his comrades, stood around the remaining door, convinced it was the next to open when Sven pulled the lever on the statue in the ogre's room. Sven caught his breath and did indeed find another lever on the bronze statue in front of him, and, pulling it, called out to his comrades. "Eyes sharp, boys. I'm throwing the lever." Once more the sound of grinding cogs and squeaking pulleys resounded around the cavern before the double doors in front of Vendel and Aldar jerked mechanically open to reveal a quintet of corrupt warriors of chaos waiting by the door. They looked rotten and emaciated, although the heroes could not decide as to whether this was a result of their captivity in the room, or it was a manifestation of the blessings of their patron. The room also contained a long table, a treasure chest, and another bronze statue in the corner. The GM and the leader rolled off for initiative, but both got a 2. Fortunately, the presence of the elf gave the heroes a +1 to their dice roll, and so it was that they surprised the chattel of the dark powers. With the Chaos Warriors bunched up by the doorway, it came as no surprise to the other heroes to see bright fire begin to erupt from the wizard Magnus the Bright's hands, as he cast a mighty fireball to smite the servants of the primordial annihilator. Chaos Warriors, as a result of their cursed chaos armor, are extremely resilient though, and with a toughness of 9 and 4 wounds apiece, the mage required his best dice rolling skills if he hoped to weaken the party's opponents. The nearest warrior sneered as the flames engulfed him, but only inflicted a single wound. The second warrior, though, lurched at the explosion and suffered 2 wounds. To the rear, the masked warrior who stood at the centre of the conflagration was burnt up from the inside out and suffered exactly 4 wounds, leaving nothing behind but a pile of charred armour on the stone floor. Also towards the rear of the unit stood a warrior with an elongated cranium and wielding a long-handled blade. He too took the full force of the blaze in the face and suffered 3 wounds, but clung on to his life by sheer determination alone. This left a single axe-wielding warrior untouched by the blaze, but the other heroes were eager to capitalize on the damage wrought by Magnus's fireball. Vendel immediately swung his blade at the Chaos Warrior in front of him, easily bypassing his clumsy defensive parries and striking him for a critical hit, which allowed him to strike once more, which he did, again biting into his opponent. The first blow caused a pair of wounds that made Vendel's target stagger, blood gushing from between the seams of his armour. With his second attack, he inflicted 3 critical hits, which allowed him to roll 3 extra dice and, in turn, caused an additional wound, neatly cutting the Chaos Warrior's sword arm off at the elbow, then slicing through his knees, and finally decapitating him before his body even hit the floor, his head sent spinning off to crash down onto the table behind. The swordsman swung his blade about him to clean off the blood as he advanced to stand upon the truncated corpse, his silence more deafening than any war cry. Next into the fray was Aldar El Gongi, swinging his pair of axes, Asdal and Asbak, like an Arabian dervish. Asdal caught on the Chaos Warrior's long sword, but the second cleaved through his long whipping tentacle arm and embedded itself squarely in his head, and the dead warrior slumped to the floor in a bloody mess. Aldar kicked the body out of the way as he advanced. Back on the other side of the cavern, Sven Hammerhelm left the statue and began to run towards the fighting. The knight, Heinrich Lohen, did the same, although he headed towards the first room that the party had entered. The next to act was Magnus, but nobody expected what was to happen next. Something erupted in the mage's heart, and he suddenly unsheathed his athame and plunged through the ingress, diving between the blood-splattered forms of Vendel and Aldar and charging the wounded Chaos Warrior to the rear. The Chaos Warrior himself was surely the most surprised to see the old man throw himself through the wall of smoke and thrust his ritual blade towards him. However, the mage's thinking was sound. The warrior's long double-handed blade, whilst deadly on the charge, was cumbersome when attacked. Magnus saw an opening and thrust his athame through the overlong helm of his foe, shoving it up under his jaw and deep into his skull. The warrior of chaos spasmed for a moment before dropping to the floor like a sack of flour. Tilean blinked in disbelief, but he would not be outdone by some hedge wizard, and, unsheathing his blade, charged the last remaining chaos warrior. The dizzying speed of the elf's attack wrong-footed his enemy, and his successful blow was able to inflict 2 wounds on the axe-wielding maniac from the north. It was then time for the chaos warrior to attack back, but Tilean's blow had taken the wind out of him, and his feeble thrust missed. Vendel moved to attack first, and although his lightning thrust hit its target, it only caused a single wound on the armoured warrior. Next to act was Sven, who, sensing the combat was nearly over, ran to the locked door in the first room they had entered. Heinrich likewise followed the experienced dwarf's lead, but unfortunately he was not as sure-footed and tripped over the door frame.
Oh, by Ulrich's beard, who put that bloody door frame there?
Tilean was next to fight, and managed to slip his blade past the defensive parries of the Chaos Warrior, but the point of his sword was turned away by the ensorcelled armour his opponent wore. A snarl of frustration split the Dark Elf's face. Magnus pushed past the hissing Druki and gripped his Athame firmly by the pommel, murder once more in his eyes. His opponent's high weapon skill meant he needed a 10 on his die to hit and then a 9 to wound the devotee of the Dark Powers. But with assassin-like precision, he quickly identified a chink in his target's armour under the armpit and stuck his knife in deep, piercing the Chaos Warrior's heart. The eyes of his victim rolled back in their sockets, and the hulking Northman dropped to the floor, dead, as Magnus climbed onto his corpse in triumph. With the death of the last Chaos Warrior, it once more returned to the exploration phase. Heinrich looked around him to see if anyone had noticed his fall, and, seeing that no one had, quietly picked himself up. Aldar couldn't help himself and moved to the treasure chest in the corner, opened it, and found a cool 150 gold crowns. Wendell was next to act and made a beeline for the bronze statue in the other corner of the room and, finding it too possessed a lever, pulled down on it. The sound of cogs spinning and ancient mechanisms whirring reverberated around the cavern, and, with a jolt, the locked door back in the first room the party had entered sprung open. Magnus was the next to move, and headed towards the newly opened door, as did Tilean. The door led to a long room that was bisected by an underground stream running through it. On the other side of this was a magical circle, within which stood a foul sorcerer of chaos, a man now only known as Broglio, but someone whose history stretched back much further. Alongside the ritualist stood a tall bookshelf full of illicit tomes, a treasure chest, and another bronze statue. Sven was the first to act, and, grabbing the spear he had found in the weapons rack earlier in one hand, he rounded the corner and hurled it at the sorcerer on the other side of the watery chasm. However, throwing things was not the dwarf's forte, and with his bow skill of 4, he required a 9 to hit. But that was exactly what he rolled. The dwarf got to roll 3 damage dice when throwing a spear. He needed a 7 or more to wound the Plague Swarm practitioner of putrid powers, and managed to inflict 2 wounds on the exposed torso of Broglio. Heinrich moved next, and made his way to be adjacent to the ingress to the sorcerer's room. He stopped short of the doorway though, and began to fumble about in his knapsack, searching for the rope and metal spikes he had there. Tilean too moved to be adjacent to his comrade, as did the fearless wizard Magnus the Bright, whose killing spree had earned him the moniker Magnus the Bloody. Next up was Wendell, who moved at a brisk pace and reached the main cavern. Aldar tried to do the same, but tripped over a flagstone on the way and fell over.
Ugh! By Grimnia's beard, these floors aren't even. Bloody Ungak workmanship.
In the monster phase, Broglio pulled the spear protruding from his abdomen out, snapped it, and tossed it to the floor. A stream of infected blood flowed from the wound, but suddenly, the magic circle the sorcerer stood in began to glow, and it healed in an instant, and Broglio recovered a single wound. The sorcerer then grinned at the dwarf across from him on the other side of the chasm as he brought out a small glass lens from under his robes and muttered the words of power. The lens seemed to dissolve in his palm, and suddenly the sorcerer's eyes glazed over. From within, a green light began to glow in intensity until suddenly a beam of pure energy struck Sven Hammerhelm with all its magical might. However, the dwarf's reactions were lightning fast, and he brought the dwarf relic shield he had found during his first expedition in Tobaro up to wholly deflect all of the energy harmlessly away, much to the chagrin of Broglio. There was no time to waste. Sven grit his teeth, took a couple of steps back, and launched himself across the chasm. To make the leap, he had to pass a speed test by rolling equal to or under his speed characteristic. However, Sven only had a speed of 5, and if he failed, he would fall into the underground river and be washed away, never to be seen again. However, without a second thought, the dwarf jumped, and, rolling a 1, easily made it across the chasm, much to the shock of Broglio. Unfortunately, the jump had taken quite a lot out of the dwarf, and his hammer swing was blocked by the staff of the sorcerer of Nurgle. Heinrich moved next and followed the dwarf, his hastily built rope bridge in hand. Back in the cavern, Wendell moved towards the other heroes, followed by Aldar the dwarf. And finally, Tilean and Magnus moved up behind Heinrich. Once more the magical circle flared into life and healed the remaining wound of Broglio, bringing the Chaos Sorcerer back up to full health. But right in front of him stood an angry dwarf with murder in its eyes. This was not where he wanted to be. He took a step back, pulled out a glass phial of crushed jade mixed with water, and allowed a drop to spill onto the magic circle below as he uttered the charm to summon forth a pool of many places. Normally, these provide a stable conduit to another part of the dungeon, but by casting it on the magical circle, the calm waters of the pool became a sucking maelstrom that dragged both the sorcerer and the dwarf Sven Hammerhelm down into its depths, before collapsing in on itself, with both it and the magical circle upon which it had been cast blinking out of existence. Heinrich shouted out, but it was too late. The party's de facto leader was gone. It then returned to the exploration phase. Heinrich attached one end of the rope bridge to the floor, jumped the chasm, mimicking Sven's feet, and then attached the other end to the opposite side. He searched the floor, but there was neither the sorcerer nor Sven Hammerhelm. Back in the cavern, upon hearing Heinrich's cry, both Wendell and Aldar raced towards the others. Tilean followed Heinrich across, searching the gloom with his keen elven eyes, but there was no sign, and even the illumination that Magnus brought with him in the form of a burning flame on top of his staff could shed no light on the mystery of their missing comrade. Heinrich bit his tongue and moved to the statue in the far corner. Death was an occupational hazard for dungeoneers, but this knowledge did not make the loss of a friend any easier. They still had a task to perform, though. He would slay the traitor Marco Broglio in Sven's name, and, with resolve stealing his heart, he pulled the lever on the statue. Once again, Cog's word and hidden mechanisms clanked into life. At the far end of the cavern, the lock on the small portcullis blocking the party's way to the cellars of the Palazzo del Vonto fell away, allowing it to be opened. Tilean went to the treasure chest and, upon opening it, found 10 feet of rope and 30 gold crowns. Magnus moved to the bookshelf. Most of the tomes were rotten and unusable, but he found a single copy in pristine condition. It was a small grimoire of a jade wizard that contained 4 spells. Suddenly, the portcullis door was yanked open, and heavy footfalls echoed through the cavern as the hulking form of the usurper of Tobaro, Marco Broglio, entered.
Is that you, Aldar?
Broglio cried out, spying the slayer silhouetted in the doorway on the other side of the cavern. Aye, Marco, it is.
I like your new haircut, but you're supposed to be dead. You wrinkled rats are all the same. You die hard. It's why I like you. But you're still gonna be dead at the end of this.
My axes say different.
I'll let you argue that point with the Akrabwamelu, the guardian of the deep.
And with that, Marco Broglio unlocked and threw open the trapdoors on the upper floor of the cavern, and from it dragged up an ancient throne attached to a chain. He immediately sat upon the throne, and as soon as he did so, the second pair of trapdoors in the centre of the cavern burst open to reveal a gigantic scorpion demon. The heroes won the surprise roll, and Aldar roared as he flung himself at the Akrabwamelu. His first axe swing was knocked aside by the bloody claws of the scorpion demon, but this opening allowed his second axe to crash into the hard carapace of the beast, and such was the force with which the slayer hit it that it caused 3 wounds. The next to act was Vendel. He moved to engage the new threat, but couldn't reach the melee in time. The next to move was Tilean, who ambled towards the combat. He was followed by Magnus, though, who all but shoved the elf out of the way to get to the fight and get into the cavern, although he gave the demon a wide berth once he got there. The last to move was Heinrich, who also ran past the elf, but wasn't able to reach the cavern in time. The ravening beast attacked Aldar with its pincers, but the nimble dwarf was able to dodge out of the way of both attacks, and the demon's claws carved out great chunks of the cavern floor instead. Aldar attacked again, diving under the beast and once more feigning with one attack to ensure a strike with the other. The Slayer's axe struck the underbelly of the demon and caused 3 wounds, including 2 criticals, which then gave rise to a 4th wound. The demon screamed in rage. The next to act was Magnus. He raised up another phial of the Tobaran alchemist's almighty brighty mixture, intoned the charm to cast a fireball, and then hurled an incandescent ball of flame at the scorpion demon, causing an additional 2 wounds on the Akrab Ramelu. But the wizard wasn't finished yet, and before the smoke had cleared, he was already moving towards the rear of the beast. The next to act was Vendel, who charged forwards and easily dodged the scorpion's still burning pincers to strike what he hoped would be the death blow. But his blade failed to penetrate the thick hide of the creature, and he inflicted no wounds. Heinrich moved next, but didn't reach the combat. Behind the knight came Tilean, who moved closer, knocked an arrow, and then let loose with it. It struck the demon right in the head and inflicted exactly 3 damage, taking off the last of the Akrab Melu's wounds. The beast suddenly stopped, frozen in place, before tumbling back down into the pit from which it had crawled out of, deep below the bedrock of the city of Tobaro. All eyes then fell on Marco Broglio. He scowled, but said nothing, and fled through the portcullis door into the depths of the cellars of the palazzo. The heroes looked at each other before moving to follow.